it's great to see you again, and it's especially great to have you on the Leaders Who Care series.
Thank you for having me, Mark. It was such a pleasure meeting you in Switzerland in Davos. And yeah, I'm very excited to be doing this. Thank you for having me.
What a great place to meet, like in the mountains. Just didn't get to go skiing, which is really unfortunate, but I know you are soon, which is I'm very jealous of also. And but it was great to meet you, and I hope this becomes a way that we get to know each other better as well, and our audience does too, about all the incredible stuff you're doing. So plus, you have one of the most unique names, and I love names, and I like when people pronounce names properly, not switch it to what they like it to be. So share with us your name, and if you could also briefly tell us, about Yalda, like where you're from originally, where are you now, family. Don't do what most guys do. They talk about their job right away. We'll get to that, but
Well,
tell us.
I can talk about skiing first because you said there was no skiing in Davos. Funny enough, you remember on that Thursday, it snowed. So I actually called my PA and she almost fired me as her employer. And I told her, look, all meetings after 10:30 a.m. on Friday, you're canceling those because I'm gonna go skiing.
Well, yeah, I meant I.
And you know how Davos meetings are. It's like a game of Tetris trying to fit everything in there. So I actually did get some skiing done. Maybe next year, if you're there, we'll make it a point to go skiing either on the Monday before it all gets started or on the Friday where it's actually quieter. We can do
I
that.
would love that. It depends. Are you a black mogul, super black, double diamond?
I'm leisurely. I enjoy my powder. I
Nice.
like to
Okay.
take my time.
I like that.
I won't make it tough on you.
Cool. Cool. On the ice for hockey, I can handle it. On the skiing, I just try not to kill myself hitting a tree, basically.
Okay, well, good thing is there are many trees. It's actually very vast slopes. So yeah, you'd like it.
Awesome. Let's do it. Let's do it. Now, tell us about Yalda.
So yeah, my name. So I'm Lebanese. I was born in Beirut. My name Yalda is quite hybrid. So I like to think that it's at the intersection of different civilizations and cultures. So in Persian, Yalda, Shaba Yalda is the longest night of the year. It's a Persian festival, and it's celebrated by eating fruits and making well wishes for the year ahead. It's the winter solstice. So
Hmm.
that's what it's known for. In Arabic, it comes from the word wilede, which means birth. So yalida is to be born. So that's its meaning in Arabic. In Aramaic, which is the language that was spoken by the Christ, it means it's the birth of Christ. So you can see it in literature there. And then I think in Hebrew and in Turkish, it means little girl or some variation of baby girl. So there you go. Across
Oh, so,
different civilization, cultures, languages, it kind of brings everything together.
but
Um,
it's a commonality of just life and well-being in all.
yeah, right. It's like it's new beginnings, births, transitions, right? Because in the winter solstice, you're transitioning
Yeah.
from one season to another. Um, all this to say, I think my parents were just going through some post-war syndrome, and they had no clue it meant all this. They just liked the name, and yeah, I landed with it. So
I love it. I love
that's
it.
my first name. Yeah, I think we did touch on that in Davos. So thank you for remembering.
So tell us about family, a little bit of a background. Your family.
Yeah, so I'm a mom to three kids. I like to say that I have a tornado, a zoo, and a circus. Uh, they're lovely, but they're very high energy. My husband's Italian, so they're mixed culture kids.
Hmm.
We're trying to combine and integrate, all the different languages and traditions and yeah, a history. Obviously, I have a very strong Lebanese identity, which I hope to pass on to them, and then that they will pass on to their children as well. So we do spend quite a bit of time traveling. There was a recurring joke in my mom's group at some point that everyone should apply to be the kids' nannies because then they just, fly everywhere and travel to all these amazing places in Italy and the Middle East and the States. So
I
yeah,
love it.
we do travel quite a bit. They're high energy. They're good fun. They're small. They're 8, 5, and 3. So I haven't really slept in the last decade. But you know what they say, we'll all sleep when we're dead. So
Exactly.
trying to fit it all in and multitasking between, the business, which I mentioned, the foundation, which we also discussed, and then family life. So yeah, but ultimately it's all for them, trying to build a legacy that they'll be proud of.
100%. That's the best answer ever. I am from Montreal, big Lebanese community in Montreal, and Mediterranean food, Lebanese food is like the best. And basically, even though I do love Italian food too, to get the whole family in there, but I mean, it's so good. And I have actually good friends still in Beirut, and always hoping that we can everybody can calm down and start working together and have have peace together and do good things together and not waste all the energy on all the other stuff. So which is part of what we even like to talk about on leaders who care is care about each other and stuff. So I love that. But I have an aunt in Montreal who's now 96, she's like a second mom. And she told me a long time ago, because I have three boys. Now one's married to my bonus daughter, I call her, from Denmark. And but she told me a long time ago, she said, cherish the running around, the rushing, the messes, the arguments, the stress, this and that, and all of it, because when it's gone, you're going to miss it. So cherish the
Yeah,
moment.
no, no, that's true. They say you only get like 15 summers with your kids. Then they're teenagers and they're off doing their own things. They prioritize their friends, their girlfriends, their mentors, their coaches, their teams over spending time with their parents. So now, while they're still little, that's when you can, like be very greedy with
Exactly.
their
A
time. Yeah.
lot of hugs and stuff. And Jay Leno used to say, and then we'll move on. Comedian here. I don't know if you know him or not, but he's a comedian and he'd been on Tonight Show for years. He said when they're teenagers, about 13, 14, they actually get abducted by aliens, basically, and then they're brought back around 19 and 20 as normal, somewhat normal human beings again. So that's what you have to look forward to.
I know. And I was a very bad teenager, so I really hope they don't turn out like me. I gave my parents so much grief growing up. Um,
Well,
let's see.
just wait
Hopefully it's
when
my
they
husband's genes as teenagers, not mine.
Well, just wait when they hear about some stories, they'll say, "But mom, you did stuff too."
Oh dear. I had a fake ID when I was 15. I used to sneak out of the house at midnight, go clubbing, steal the car, come back.
You do
Like
realize
I
this,
said, I've always had a very big, inclination for adrenaline rush.
you do realize this is
Started
being recorded
quite
and
young.
they
Oh
might
dear.
hear this, right? Uh, so so
Oh,
you just talked a little bit about what you like as a teenager with fake IDs and whatnot. Were you entrepreneurial-ish? Were you an organizer or sports, music? What were you like?
yeah, I think so. I was very curious as a child, and I kind of always knew where I wanted to get to. So by the age of 10, so we left when the civil war broke out in Lebanon. So we left in 89. We lived in Cyprus. I went to 3 different schools there. Then my father had a green card, and obviously being Lebanese at the time and still being Lebanese now, I think it's like the fourth or fifth worst passport in the world. So it's always been in Lebanese culture to try and acquire, a different citizenship just for the luxury of mobility, which should be a basic human right.
Sure.
So we moved to the US and lived there for a few years. Also did a couple of schools there, then went back to Lebanon, did another couple of schools there. So yeah, I guess by the age of 10, I had been to like 7 different schools. So I think adaptability is something that definitely helped and shaped my personality. And I honestly think it's a Lebanese thing as well. It's very typical of communities that have large expat communities. You just yeah, when you have nothing to lose, you learn how to become entrepreneurial and self-sufficient, and you thrive on instability. And it's a big advantage when you compare yourself to your peers that perhaps have had more stable lives. It's I always say, like, in chaos and conflict and volatility, that's where my comfort zone is. And I think that also reflected professionally in some of the choices that I've made. Like whenever something is too stable or too quiet, I wouldn't say I self-sabotage, but I do shake things in a way that makes it more challenging.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I compare a lot of things to sports, and generally, the best coaches I find, and sometimes the best bosses, the best entrepreneurs, are the ones that weren't the superstars initially, because the superstars have stuff already there for them, or it's a natural ability to be a star, but they can't necessarily coach someone on how to really be resilient and whatnot because it came so natural to them, and it just came to them. And so I know in my life I had a lot of leaders who really cared about me, and I took a major pay cut to join an organization that a president of a sports team that offered me my dream job told me to take the other job that was less money but was going to let me talk to leaders around the world and was going to frame me, it was going to give me experience and all that stuff. So I think you're right. If you take it as an advantage, it ends up being a super advantage. In fact, they say that kids that learn multiple languages early on in their life actually fall behind a little bit at the beginning, but then storm ahead after that. So in a way, that's a little bit of the same thing there. You talked
It's
about.
the languages, but it's also, just landing different places. It's funny now, like we're applying for schools here in the UK for our kids, and it's almost like applying for Harvard. Like that's the standard. And that's obviously the standard that we want to give our kids. But then growing up, the determining factor for where we got sent to school was literally the neighborhood school closest to the house,
Mhm.
right? So we would
Me
just
too.
land somewhere new, have to make new friendships, have to adapt, have to pick up on the learning curve. So I think that really early on kind of built the stamina that you need for the hardships that come later on in life.
I, th- I, I
And
think
and
you're
that
right.
kind of happened by accident. I don't think, my parents had a plan, oh, we're going to move them 7 schools by the time they're 10 years old. It just that's how life happened. We had to move because of war, because of work opportunities, because of family. And then we would just land in a new place and have to adapt and thrive. And thriving was a big part of I guess our home culture, like getting homework done and getting good grades and being on obviously good behavior. So we kind of had that framework. And if you think about it, that's the framework for entrepreneurs, for success, for life, for everything.
Yeah, 100%. And I think just like international travel does, you get a diversity, you get to see different things, you get to see how people look at different things that you looked at in a different way, and find out that none of you is wrong. It's just a different way of looking at something. And so I think it's brilliant foundation for a background. And when you were in school, going to all those schools, and my son's had a little bit of that actually also, and you even did foreign service, education at Georgetown. I saw when you were going through all that. What were you envisioning? If you think back, what were you envisioning at that point?
I think early on, I always envisioned excellence. I didn't know what that would necessarily resemble. Like I remember at the age, I think of 11 or 12, I was in a certain school in Lebanon. And I told my parents that I wanted to change schools and go to like this very like a school that had a reputation for being, very strict and very it was a Jesuit school. Like I was at a very liberal lycée before. But in my mind, it's, I had done my research, at the age of 10, 11, and I had seen that most of, the politicians and the Lebanese like historically our heads of states, etc., had gone to that school. So I wanted to be in that school. So I kind of understood that association. So growing up, I didn't necessarily there were some subjects that very early on I was very, very passionate about. I was super passionate about history, about international relations. I remember as a teenager, I would, skip school and go demonstrate with the university students because there was a social cause that I was really very passionate about. And that was atypical, if you think about it, of kids that are 12, 13, 14 years old. I was involved with the scouts, that notion of leadership, I understood quite early. So I didn't necessarily know, which profession I would land in, but I always knew that I didn't necessarily do well with authority. So I wanted to be my own boss. Um, when you tell me I can't do something, I'm very likely to try and prove the opposite. So these were kind of traits that always stood out. And then, yeah, I was really passionate about foreign service. And I did that year at Georgetown in my last year of university. So I studied economics and political science at the American University of Beirut. And my last year, I decided to do an exchange program, landed in Georgetown, and worked as a legislative aide to a senator.
Right.
Yeah, so on Capitol Hill, and then took foreign service classes at Georgetown. And that was great. And, the experience, I always say, you were like in the belly of the beast. And those were the years where you had all these superstars of politics that were in the Senate and the House. You had, John Kerry and Hillary Clinton, Obama, all these that, you'd run into them at the cafeteria, and I was just blown away by that atmosphere. And whilst at Georgetown, I applied to do my master's, which was a long shot. I honestly did not expect to be admitted, especially not so early on. I still had a year of university, and typically you work in between your undergrad and your grad school. But I applied to the Kennedy School, and then the following March, I got accepted. And I always say, like, that was hard to beat. Like that moment, getting an acceptance letter from Harvard, which was unfathomable. I think that's a moment I will always remember. And my husband hates it when I say this, but it was definitely a better moment than giving birth to my kids.
Oh no.
As much as I love them, but the pain that came with that, with
Oh gosh. Yeah, that's
I'd say
devastating.
they're kind of equivalent. So obviously that was an amazing moment. And then I went on to do my master's in public policy at the Kennedy School. Yeah, I always thought I would end up working for a large multilateral organization like a World Bank or a United Nations or an IMF. So that was kind of the plan. Effectively, what happened is I had taken on some student loans that I needed to pay back. Um, and at the time, so yeah, the Harvard years were amazing. Like fifth, what is it now? 17 years later, it's still that network that I fall back on. Yeah, it was. We'll need another podcast for just those couple of Harvard years.
Well,
Um,
it's interesting, really quick. We always say in LA that leave them wanting more so we can do a sequel. So,
yeah, we'll do a sequel. Well,
um,
I was in class with Chris Voss, who did the master class, the FBI hostage negotiator. I
yeah.
had the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Denmark that was sharing notes on his economics paper with me. The former Prime Minister of Tanzania. It was just, it was
You
the dream.
you know what's great about that? If I can interrupt, what's great about
Yeah,
that is, and we'll talk about influencers a little bit later, is that a kid in Lebanon, as maybe another kid that's looking at this from Lebanon or somewhere, and hear you talking about that, and that gives that kid permission, a gleam in their eyes, type of thing. That wow, I may be able to do this too, type of deal.
absolutely. Anyone could do this, and it's not even being given permission. It's by default. Like that's
Right.
what every single child should be thriving for.
Yeah,
Like thrive, like aim high. The higher you aim, even if you fall short, that's pretty high, right?
absolutely.
That's why I always tell my kids, like, have very set very high goals for yourself. Do
Yeah.
it.
No, you're right.
And
Because
if you
if
fall
you,
short, you're still falling, somewhere like in between, and it's still pretty good. And if you don't try, then you'll never know. Like the number of times that I've been rejected for different things, and I eventually uh, grew my success path by way of rejection.
yeah, and it's
That
not, and it's what do they say in sports or games? They say you don't win and lose, you win and learn,
Oh, absolutely, you
and
win and
something like
learn.
that. So when you were share a little bit of how it evolved because you did this
Yeah, so I went to the Kennedy School, as I said, like best 2 years of my life. I'm not gonna say it was all downhill from there, but it set the bar pretty high in terms of making sure my subsequent experiences were gonna be as good. And then I had this loan, and the pound was at 2. And I was thinking, with my very pragmatic hat, well, it'll take me half the time to pay back these loans if I go work in London in investment banking and earn in pounds. So I interviewed with a few banks, and I was given two offers. The first one was from Goldman Sachs, and the second one was from Lehman Brothers. And every time I interviewed with Goldman, it was such a pain. It was such a
Oh
pain.
God.
I would have like post-traumatic stress disorder, and I'd be surprised every time they would call me back for another interview because you have to go through several rounds of interviews. Whereas with Lehman, it was such a breeze. Like I connected with the people, I felt very at home. So I turned down Goldman Sachs in 2008 and took a job with Lehman in investment banking. So clearly not the best industry to be at the dawn of a major financial crisis, and definitely not
Right.
the best place to be at Lehman Brothers. So that was quite a short-lived experience. I joined in June, left in September when they went under. I had my 5 minutes of fame leaving the Canary Wharf office with the cardboard boxes and the press taking pictures, and then landing on the cover of the Daily Mail the next day as enemy of state number one because they
Oh, no.
metastasizing all the bankers. You probably remember that.
Yeah, I do remember
Then
that.
obviously the pound is no longer at 2, and everyone's struggling to find a job. Luckily, I landed next door. So Lehman's building was 25 Bank Street, and I took a job at 20 Bank Street at Morgan Stanley. Which which good news is I didn't have to change my commute. So worked at Morgan Stanley for a few years. In 2010, I met my husband, who was then my boyfriend, and he was moving to Qatar. He worked in construction, and he had a big project, which was their airport, which if you've flown through is ranked number one airport anywhere in the world. So obviously he was not going for a few weeks. He was going to settle there and to take on packages for this massive project. So I needed a reason to go see my boyfriend in Qatar. I was in my early 20s. I Googled top 10 business people Qatar. And then in true Lebanese fashion, went to the senior leadership at Morgan Stanley and convinced them that I was related to all of them. All of them. All distant cousins, all relatives, all best friends with my parents. And they kind of like grinned, and they're like, really? Then they're like, okay, well, she speaks the language. It's kind of the same region, so she must be telling the truth. And then they were like, I remember the head of wealth management, that was the division that I was working on. It's like, you're going to make a lot of people upset because Qatar is usually covered out of Dubai and you're sitting here in London. But I'll take a chance on you. And then he was like, his name was David Haith. He's like, the only thing I do ask of you is you need to write call notes, as in you need to, write who you met and put their profile and what was discussed during the meeting. I'm like, yeah, obviously I can do that. And then I fly to Doha. I knew absolutely no one. My very first time in a Gulf country, I hadn't even been to Dubai. And then someone introduced me to this one private banker at Credit Suisse. And you probably know how private bankers are. Like they're notoriously territorial and private. They're
Yeah.
not going to make an introduction. They're not going to tell you, go meet this one. I'll do you a favor. And the only thing he did do, no, he was like, you're wasting your time in Qatar. Go cover Kuwait. That's where all the opportunities are. They're in Kuwait. The only thing he did do, he gave me his driver. And he's like, my driver will drop you back at your hotel. And in that 5-minute car ride from where the meeting was taking place to the hotel, I had a eureka moment where I asked the driver for his business card and was like, do you drive like all the bankers or just these bankers? He's like, yeah, we drive most of the bankers of Credit Suisse. And Credit Suisse had been covering the Gulf since the 90s. So like, they had like the longest stint there. I called the number. It was an agency. I'm like, can you please send me a driver that drives the Credit Suisse bankers? Tomorrow, I'm here for a week and I need someone to drive me around. So they send me someone the next day. It was a different driver. And he's like, well, ma'am, where would you like to go? I'm like, look, I have no clue where I'm going, but you're going to start driving me around to all of the places you drive those bankers to. In true Lebanese hustler style. And this predates Google Map. And Qatar 2010, 11, very different from Qatar 2025. I would drive like through the deserts of like random places in the country, Wakra, Wajba, El Khor, like desert. And then you'd see a gate. And behind the gate, there'd be a palace. And the only comfort I had was that a banker from Credit Suisse had been there before me. We would pull down the window, and then obviously there's a gatekeeper, and very confidently I'd be like, I'm here to see the sheikh. There must be someone important living behind. A sheikh means someone
Right.
of importance.
Right.
It's a title that you give royalty or someone who's pretty senior
Yep.
in the community, typically male. And then they'd scramble. They'd look at their agenda. They'll be like, oh, but you're not on the guest list. And I'd pull out a business card that said Morgan Stanley London. And I'd be like, oh, but I flew all the way from London for this meeting. And then I'd fake a call to a fake assistant that my 23, 24-year-old self did not have. And like, oh, I'm at the palace and they're saying that I'm not on the books. Like, what's happening here? Anyways, they would panic. I'd put on a scene. And eventually, if I was really lucky, I would meet the sheikh, or on less lucky days, but still equally enjoyable, I'd meet the wife, because very often I was literally showing up in people's homes. I'd meet the sons, the daughters, the finance officer, the chief of staff, someone within that ecosystem. And that's how I started building my book of relationships. And in agreement with Morgan Stanley's instructions, fill out those call notes and log them in so that they could continue paying for my future travels.
Right, exactly.
To Qatar. And then a few
You
years.
do realize
Yeah.
this is LA talking again, that this could be a good movie.
Oh yeah, I should start with a book before a movie, before I forget all this.
So
But
how
yeah,
did
we will memorialize it with this podcast, right? So it'll live
exactly?
somewhere.
I found that super exciting, and it's really is the way to do it. I always think back to the lady that I can't remember her name right now, and created Spanx, and she went to whatchamacallit, the store.
Northstorm.
Yeah, exactly. Nordstrom, and she went to the CEO, and they said, "Well, you don't do that. That's not how you do it." But that's exactly why you should do it. That people don't do it, and she got a big contract, etc. So, hey, what's the worst that
That's
can
how I
happen?
did. Because you have nothing to lose. Like, what's the worst thing that could happen? You get
Right.
rejected, but it's fine. Like, you're building off of nothing. Like, I
Yeah.
had no relationships. I had to build relationships. I would show up so many places I wasn't invited to. I remember there was this one, a KPMG, I think, or one of these auditing firms that were doing a gala dinner. And I found out about it. And obviously, I was there on a business trip. So I went to the mall and like bought a dress. and then did my hair and makeup and just showed up at the Ritz or wherever it was taking place and made everyone confused because they thought that I was maybe a guest of the speakers, and then the speakers thought I was maybe a guest of KPMG, but I was there. I looked decent. And then I would pick the table where you had like the VIP guests sitting and like go and sit next to them and strike up a conversation. And yeah, so I
You
was having
know
loads of fun with it.
that
Now
must,
all
I think that's the
things are
key.
different. I would very unlikely do that today, but back then, um,
Well, you
you know,
could sometimes today. I think the key is you take on the challenge, you have fun with it, and you just go for it. And people see that you're comfortable, you're engaging and whatnot. And hey, if 7 out of 10 times you get to talk to somebody great, fantastic. It usually leads to something. I do want to ask you a question though.
yes.
Um, we were launched on International Women's Day, our firm, because of that was our core part of our business when we started. And share with us, how you did feel. Obviously, I saw how you navigated and thrived being a woman, but but being a woman, not to mention in the States, never mind in Middle East and certain countries,
Mm.
how things are perceived, where women's position is, and all that. How did it feel for you, aside from the excitement of getting yourself into events and meeting people?
Yeah.
How did you feel about the whole process of and being a woman in business, etc.?
Yeah, I don't know. And I often say this, I don't know which is worse. The uh, misogynistic environment of the MAGA Trump loving tech bros of Silicon Valley that I have
Hmm.
to interact with,
Right,
that I'm in the VC space, or the patriarchal society of the Middle East. As a result, I've always had to, yeah, work like 100, not even 1,000 times harder
right,
than my male peers. In the Valley, everything is done through a handshake, right? When you're a woman, you kind of have to prove yourself time and time again as being a very reliable counterpart. In the Middle East, you maybe being a woman gets you the first meeting, but getting very proud, very often male businessmen to take you seriously, and for that trust element to be to develop, especially as an advisor, like you're a woman advising them, like these amazing business people who have built empires very often, and you're there telling them, well, I can advise you on how you should allocate to private tech companies. So that you kind of have to morph into being a subject matter expert,
right,
regardless of what your gender is. And that comes with, again, like working 10 times as hard, delivering on performance, and really proving that you can offer something that they're not going to get either performance wise or access wise anywhere else. And that's why they should be partnering with you. Again, versus a handshake agreement that happens between between business people that are very often men.
it's interesting because I think it goes back, and I find this often, to the thread of what you were like as a kid, all the things you had in your life to get you to that point, to be strong enough, to be smart enough, to do a lot of research, to just be resilient. I think it created a great foundation for you to be able to do and work 1,000 times harder, as a woman, to make that happen. I want to jump a little bit to what you're doing with Bracket right now.
Yeah.
And they say the fourth industrial revolution is about technology, AI for sure, fast and furious going on. But the fifth is about humanity and how they come together. Um, I was super excited to hear when we were in Davos, you talk about what you're doing with Bracket Capital and Bracket Foundation. Could you share what the mission is, what the focus of your investments are, how AI and tech play into it? Just tell us about what you're doing with Bracket Capital and Bracket Foundation.
Yeah, absolutely. So I always say Bracket Capital was my fourth baby. Bracket Foundation was my fifth baby. So I'm a mom of five, not of three.
And you look fantastic.
Oh, thank you. Well, what can I say? Half measures everywhere. Half measure mom, half measure no. I
No,
should. Yeah, no, it's a challenge, but you make time for things that are important.
right.
So yeah, so we founded. So I'm Bracket's co-founder. It's me and Jahan, who leads our investment team in Los Angeles. I guess how we founded Bracket initially. So I was working for this mid-cap private equity. So after Morgan Stanley, a few years later, this mid-cap private equity firm hires me to lead their Doha office called InvestCorp. And I credit them with like the biggest break in my career because that kind of unlocked, the top 1% that you couldn't just show up at their door and introduce yourself, a cold calling with a briefcase.
Right.
Um, and during those years, so 20, I would say 13 to 16, you had a lot of generational shifts in leadership throughout the Gulf region. And those were also the years where the appetite for investing in big tech companies was really starting to skyrocket. So you probably remember back in I think 15 or 16, you had the Saudis that invested in Uber at a $2 billion valuation, and that was considered like way extravagant. But unless you were a sovereign, you're not really getting access to the deal flow. And if you were getting access to the deal flow, it was probably negative selection bias. It meant that the West Coast passed on it, East Coast passed on it, Europe passed on it, all the sovereigns passed on it, and it was landing on your desk, probably something you wanted to sell and not something you wanted to buy.
Right.
Um, so I pitched InvestCorp at the time with doing venture internally for them. I was 8 months pregnant. They turned it down. They were like, "Oh, we don't have the risk appetite for this at the moment." So I went back home that evening and told my husband I'm gonna resign and I'm gonna set up my own VC. And he's like, "You're losing your mind. Can't do that. That's madness. We have the perfect setup here. We're starting a family." I was like, "No, no, I have a hunch. Like I feel it. It's a hunch." He's like, "It's not called a hunch. It's called hormones. You're 8 months pregnant." Anyways, long story short, I did resign from InvestCorp. I gave birth in December. And then my co-founder, who I knew when I was at Morgan Stanley, he was at Goldman. When I moved to InvestCorp, he moved to Millennium, and we were part of the same Ivy League circles. And we kind of, mirrored and followed each other's careers. He was moving back to Los Angeles to do venture investing. So I'm like, "Look, it feels like the stars are aligned. Let's try to do this together." And he was like, "Okay, can you raise a fund?" Like, "Yeah, piece of cake." Raising a fund.
Of course.
Not a piece of cake.
Right.
I gave birth in December. And then in between navigating postpartum depression and mastitis and pumping and breastfeeding and how a newborn works for the very first time, I set out to raise a fund. And I don't know how I managed superhuman powers that come with birthing a new human.
It's that
I
ray of sunlight that's coming down that's with
It's
you
not
all
there.
the
Yeah, I can.
time. No, it's good. That's how you
It's not
did it.
there.
You've got that.
Yeah,
You've
I
got
got
that.
inspiration. I
Yeah.
know. So raised the first fund. And early on, we realized that we wanted to invest in transformative, disruptive, big tech companies. But we wanted to do so in a way that was value driven from a entry price perspective. So not chasing primaries just for the sake of chasing primaries and getting into any round. We wanted, to get in at the right price. So that was kind of the immediate vision of how we would be creating values for our LPs. And as a result, we ended up being one of the first movers in secondaries. So providing liquidity solutions to early employees, founders, and early stage funds. Um, and yeah, we I guess for the first fund was a $50 million fund, and now we manage 1.2 billion across the three vintages that we managed, that we launched. And in terms of sector specific, we were always sector agnostic. but there was a common thread in terms of the type of companies that we would be going after. And if you think about it, our universe of companies isn't that big. It's like 100 companies that we monitor at any point in time. So you had to be a unicorn, you had to be a serial entrepreneur, founder, operator, a company with strong unit economics, either profitable or clear path to profitability, something that was capex light, and something that we could price. So biotech, for a health tech are typically industries that are difficult to price. So we ended up doing a lot of software. Just to make a long story short, we invest a lot in software. We invest, AI, cybersecurity, space tech was something that we looked at early and that we continued on from a theme perspective. Now we're looking at longevity. That's a theme that we really like, which is more how you, increase your healthy lifespan. So live longer, healthier. We think, that's going to be big. We really like space. We think that space today is similar to like the internet in the 90s. Like the path to commercialization is imminent. We're really curious about the energy transition. With AI comes demand for data centers, for a lot of energy supply. So how you transition away from hydrocarbons and into areas like nuclear fusion, that's something that we've been looking at increasingly. And, AI is going to be everywhere. AI is going to be like saying internet, right?
100%.
So you'll have different verticals in AI. AI for good is a theme that we really like. So personally, I'm quite concerned with deregulation. I understand that there are loads of opportunities from an innovation perspective that comes with deregulation, but at the same time, it's going to unleash so much harm on the internet. And the ones who will be most affected will be the most marginalized and vulnerable people of society. And that ties into what we do at the foundation. So in 2019, we launched Bracket Foundation with the mission to leverage the power of technology for social good, and especially as it relates to online child safety. So we work on 3 verticals with the foundation. The first vertical is empowering law enforcement agencies worldwide with the right tools in AI, machine learning, NLP, etc., to better detect, prevent, and prosecute crimes that are being committed against children online, especially in the field of online child sexual abuse and exploitation. We have a partnership with the United Nations Interregional Center for Crime and Justice, so that's ongoing. It's supported by the government of the UAE. And we've now connected and trained over 200 law enforcement agencies worldwide with over 90 new tech tools that they wouldn't have been able to access if it was not for this program. We work with big tech companies on safer by design policies. I like to think that Roblox's latest change in policy to ban social for under 11s is a direct result of our white paper that we published a couple of years back on the nascent threats that exist on online social gaming platforms and the metaverse. So obviously, big tech companies are the most responsible for unleashing predators into our ecosystem, and they have the power to design platforms that diminishes the harms. And then the third vertical that we work on is really legislation. So we do a lot of lobbying both in Brussels and in DC on how you issue legislation that protects children. Obviously, privacy is a big issue. Our point of view is always when it comes to kids, safety, security comes before privacy. And it doesn't mean that both cannot coexist, but children need to be protected. And that often means that platforms need to be penalized both financially and legally for the toxicity that exists on their products. So that's the foundation's work.
That's pretty impressive, and man, do we have a lot to talk about with respect to some of the things that you mentioned. I do have one more question because, like we said, we're probably going to have to do a sequel for sure because there's so much good things here. But a client told me in 2021, a client said, with respect to 2020, the pandemic year, said it was the year that flew by slowly. He told me, and
Okay.
it feels like sometimes it was yesterday and years ago. Still, that infamous year. With all that
Mm.
said, and we're fast and furious into 2025, what are you most grateful for and what are you most hopeful for?
Oh, I'm most grateful for my children. Honestly, they give so much purpose to my life. Absolutely everything I do is for them. It's they're my inspiration, they're my true north. Their happiness is paramount. And I don't know if it's necessarily a good way of parenting or a bad way of parenting, but I never want them to live in anxiety or want or disruption, which is ironically how I lived.
Right.
Moved so much, like finance was sometimes an issue. Um, yeah, it was like there was a lot of anxiety, but still I ended up with the hunger that I guess that I have. I like to think that maybe it was an outlier effect and not necessarily a rule. But when it comes to them, like I want them to lead, a very peaceful, harmonious life, and then hopefully the hunger comes differently.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And I guess that's what you're most hopeful for as well, obviously.
I think like we're as you said, you touched on the fourth, fifth industrial, sixth industrial revolution. I think everything's going to be accelerated going forward. It's going to create loads of opportunities. People will be connected in ways that was never before imagined, right?
Yep.
It's uh, information will become faster. Geographies will become smaller. I just hope that there'll be, kindness and tolerance and empathy as these changes occur, and that we can consciously, as a society, pick up the marginalized communities and bring them on this journey with us, as opposed to creating more social disparities that exist already between so many.
Well said. It's part of the reason why we highlight leaders who care, and
Absolutely,
it's a
and thank
big
you for that.
it's a bigger topic than even that. But hey, I'm grateful that I have a new friend, which is fantastic.
Likewise.
And I'm grateful that you are a leader who cares. And as disruptive as it may be, it's good when you care about it. And that's what I'm hopeful for at the same time. So thanks a million for being on the Leaders Who Care series, and we really
Thank you,
appreciate it.
Mark. This was great fun. And we will go skiing next time in Davos.
Hopefully, we don't have to wait that long to see each other, but that'll be fantastic goal. I'd love it. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.